story on page 81 of your book. So if you get your books out and join me there, you're going to notice some highlighting. Again, I'll continue to highlight words that are unique to the story, words that we may not be familiar with, or that are used differently in yellow. And you're going to see and hear some purple highlighting. I did that once before, and I was pointing out to you some of the figurative language that Karen Hesse is using in this book. And I do that in this chapter, in this letter as well. And the reason why is in our writing activities, we're using some figurative language. And throughout this whole book, the author does an incredible example of using some beautiful figurative language. And I'm just going to point out a little bit of that in this letter. So on page 81, and our quote from Pushkin, as I said before, is going to highlight something that's going to happen in this letter. And it begins, when suddenly a storm, and the wide sea was rearing, the helmsman and the crew were lost. No sailor by the storm was tossed ashore, but I who had been singing. I chant the songs I loved of yore, and on the sunned and rocky shore I dry my robes, all wet and clinging. September 21st, 1920, Atlantic Ocean. Dear Tova, I have lost so much already, and now it seems I must lose more. I nearly drowned at sea in a horrible storm, but I am alive. Everyone did not have my luck, but I am alive. Our ship, which seemed so large and safe when first I boarded, barely survived the fury of the storm. The tempest started during the night while we slept. I had dreams of pogroms, of Cossacks on their horses, snapping whips at me, pointing rifles. I heard the crack of gunshot. In my dream, the countryside was burning. I trembled in your cellar while the fire raged around me. I woke from one terror into another. I had been thrown to the floor of my cabin, tossed from my bed by the rising seas. Quickly I pulled on my clothes, tying my kerchief with trembling fingers. I opened my cabin door. Though it was still night, the sky was a sickly yellow, like an old bruise. I bashed against the ship's walls, flung back and forth by the tossing sea as I made my way toward the deck. The ship shivered in the hateful ocean. Twice the floor dropped beneath me suddenly, and I fell. There was so much confusion on deck. No rain yet, but a wind that roared. The seas, which had seemed so gentle yesterday, rose like hungry beasts, mouths open, hovering and crashing over the sides of the ship. Sailors ran like spiders, back and forth in the yellow light. They yelled to each other over the wind, shouting directions. My Pieter, clung to a pillar as a wave broke over his shoulders. All the horrors of Russia returned to me. The storm frightened me as much as any pogrom. When the peasants would come after the Jews to burn our homes, to break into our stores, to murder us. My stomach twisted, and I knew I would be sick, so I crawled, making my way with difficulty toward the side of the ship. The ship rolled, my stomach rolled with it. I clung to the rail, trying to raise up off my knees so I would not soil myself with my own sickness. The ship plummeted from beneath me, and I hit my head on the metal rail. Someone came up behind me and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Pieter, I cried. I didn't realize the waves had drenched me. Come, Rifka, Pieter yelled over the wind. You must come away from the side. I started shivering. I could taste blood in my mouth and smell it in my nose. It had a cold metallic taste that made my stomach twist inside out. I tore away from Pieter's grip and ran back to the rail, emptying my stomach over the side. Before I could finish, a wall of water, rose up over me. Pieter grabbed me around the waist and hurled me away from the side. The water came crashing down over our heads, slamming us onto the deck. Pieter held on to me as the water sucked at my body, trying to pull me overboard. If he had not been there, Tova, the ocean would have claimed me. He saved my life. Pieter held me until the wave lost its power and slipped away. Then he lifted me to my feet again before another monstrous wave could attack us. Come, he cried, guiding me toward a hatch. Quickly, you must stay down in this hold while the storm lasts. Pieter shouted over the violent wind. I descended into the ship's hold, looking up once at my friend. His hair lay plastered against his head, and water streamed from his storm clothes. Pieter, I called, are you putting me in steerage? Pieter laughed. Brave and clever, he called down to me. The wind screamed around him. Be careful, Pieter, I cried. I will, Rifka, he answered. I could hear the fear under the calm in his voice. It echoed in my ears as I stumbled down the ship's steep steps. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I found many of the other passengers already in the hold, huddled together. We were still equal. We were equally miserable, equally frightened for our lives. Everyone got sick, even me. It stank worse than a flood of soured milk down there. Women rocked back and forth, weeping. Men held their stomachs and moaned. All the time I worried for Pieter and the others. I doubted, Tova, that I would live to see my family again. If I'd had the pushkin, I could have read from it. I could have opened it to the pages that held my golden star of David, woven from broom straws, and prayed for our lives on it. But the pushkin remained above in my cabin, and I could not go after it. We shivered and sweated and retched for 36 hours until the ship stopped its pitching. At last the hatch was opened, and we climbed up out of our hole. There was no more deck left to the ship. Everything, once bolted down, had been ripped away. The player piano had crashed against a wall and shattered into pieces. Most of the deck chairs were gone too, torn right out of the floor. Twisted metal and bolts stuck up as signs of where the chairs had been. The parquet tiles, what remained of them, were thick with filth from the sea. A sailor lay on the deck, wrapped in gauze from head to toe, moaning. My heart jumped into my throat. What if it's Pieter? I thought. Oh, Tova, if only I'd known. I ran to the sailor's side, but it wasn't Pieter. I asked if there was something I could do for him. Anyway, he didn't answer. The other sailors were limping or bandaged. I looked for Pieter everywhere, but I couldn't find him. Finally, I stopped one of the officers. Have you seen the boy, Pieter? I asked. Please, I know you are busy, but could you tell me where I might find him? The officer looked down at me. He steadied my shoulders in his hands, the way Papa had the night he told me of Uncle Zeb's death. We lost one sailor overboard in the storm, he said. Pieter? I whispered. The officer nodded. Tova, I felt myself smothering. I couldn't see anything, hear anything. Somehow I found my way back into my cabin, and for the first time since leaving Berdichev, I cried. All the tears that had collected in this year, in this enormous year, shoved their way out of my heart, and how I cried. Pieter, who said I was so brave, what would he say to see me now? I didn't care. I cried for Pieter. I cried for myself. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I cried until I was empty of tears. And then I was still as the sea after a storm. I sit in my cabin and wait. Our ship has sent out a distress call. It cannot move any more on its own steam. The drum of the engines had been like a heartbeat. Now the heart has stopped. The engines are dead. We must wait for another ship to answer our signal and tow us across the ocean to America. I pray there are no more storms between now and then. We could never survive another fight with the sea. Tova, suddenly I feel how defenseless we are. Not just Jews, all of us. My mind fills with images of you and Aunt Anna and Bube Ruth and Mama and Papa. I see Bube Ruth at the rear of the long house, huddled beside her little stove, sipping tea from the samovar. I see Papa and Mama swallowed up by a strange country called America. I see you, Tova, staring out the window at the empty road, the road that has carried me away from you. I realize how precious our lives are, how brief. I want to come home. The telegram the HIAS sent from Antwerp to Mama and Papa said I would be arriving in America today. Today I sit in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on a ship that is dead. What will happen when Papa and Mama come to get me and I'm not there? How will they know when to come back? Will I ever see them again? I'm too tired, Tova. Too tired for all this trouble. At this moment, I wish I had never left Berdichev. Shalom, my Tova. Rifka.